Let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your loving kindness and your goodness towards us. We ask and we pray that you would help us to understand the truths of the time in which we live in, that you might guide us, direct us and bless us. Please shield us and strengthen us, Father, so that we might have clarity on the message that will be discussed this afternoon. Help us to understand and know your will, and direct us to the most holy place, we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. So I'm just going to draw a timeline of the Millerite history so that we can get a reference point on certain events that are happening in our own time. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the way that these timelines are drawn, especially the way that I've laid them out. But we don't have enough time to go through all the reform line histories. But they all follow the same sequence. We begin with the time of the end. It's Millerite history. And Millerite history is dealing with the beginning of modern Israel. After the time of the end, you get an increase of knowledge. After the increase of knowledge, this information is formalized. At the time of the end, the first angel's message arrives. After having arrived, there's an increase of knowledge on the message of this angel. The message becomes formalized in a coherent and understandable fashion, but there's still not enough evidence that this message is correct, so the message needs to receive some power. We mark this by the empowerment of the first angel. Then the foundation is laid. And then we see the work of the enemies. So these enemies in the varying histories are those who are opposing the work of these angels. They're opposing the work of the everlasting gospel, and there's a cause and effect relationship between this foundation and the work of the enemies. This opposition of the enemies gets to a stage where they eventually close their probation, which occurs here at the arrival of the second angel's message. And then this message will be empowered finally we come to the arrival of the third angel, and we have a closed door, which is close of probation. So this is the framework that you can identify multiple histories in the scriptures. When I came last time, we did actually go through this, and we went through two former histories prior to this, which was Moses' and Christ. So we can put events to these angels, to this everlasting gospel, and most of them we're familiar with. So we know that the time of the end of Millerite history was 1798. We know that the message was formalised in 1833 when William Miller received his credentials. We know that the message was empowered on August 11th, 1840. And on August 11th, 1840, there was a restraint of Islam. A restraint of radical Islam. This is the waymark that empowers this message that began in 1798. The foundation of the faith in that history, the foundation of our faith, was a chart that was developed in 1842, which was called the 1843 chart. And this was in May 1842. In direct response to this chart and the information on it, the enemies began to do their work against the Millerites, and it took the form of closing the doors of this message so they had no access into the churches. And this began a month later, in June 1842. This struggle between the Millerites and the Protestants got so bad that by the time we got to April the 19th, 1844, approximately 2 years later, the Protestant churches had closed their doors, and there was a separation between the Protestants and the Millerites. There was a call made at this time here, where the angel of Revelation 14, verse 8, came into history, proclaiming that Babylon had fallen. The message was empowered on August the 15th, 1844, at a camp meeting in Exeter, New Hampshire, and we mark this as a climax of the Midnight Cry. But the Midnight Cry is not just a point in history, it actually covers a period of time. And the Midnight Cry actually began a few months prior to this, in fact only a month prior to this, and it went right through until the most famous date that we're all familiar with, which was October 22nd, 1844, where the judgment of the dead was to begin. So I think that most of us are familiar with this history. Just want to add a couple of refinements to this. I want us to see that this history here, we could mark it from 1798, but I actually want to mark it from August 11th, 1840. This marks the testing period of the Protestants, who, as I said, closed their probation on April the 19th, 1844, when began a second testing period for for the Millerites. And these two individual testing points, first the Protestants, then the Millerites, was typified in the line of Christ, in the time of Christ, by the two temple cleansings that he performed in his ministry. So those two temple cleansings were typifying these two cleansings which were to occur on the eastern seaboard of America in the beginning of the 19th century. And I've already discussed this before, last time I came, but I'll just quickly add this imagery. We know that the everlasting gospel is the work of Christ in developing and then demonstrating two classes of people. So I can't emphasize that point enough, that there's always a development of two people. The church at large believes that the everlasting gospel produces good people only, and it saves people. They don't see that it actually develops and then demonstrates, causes to come to fruition another class, a class who are lost. But this is the truth of this issue, and I want to just draw it in a schematic view. This group, a generation that are on the scene, they're Protestants. And unbeknown to the Protestants, they consist of two groups, the wise and the foolish virgins. I'm going to call the wise Millerites, and I'm going to call the foolish Protestants. And we understand, although we didn't speak about it today in any great length, that the everlasting gospel is a three-step testing process. We can see it in a number of different places, but perhaps the clearest place that we might see it is John chapter 16. So if we turn to John chapter 16, and we're going to read from verse 7. Christ, talking to his disciples, says this: "Nevertheless, I tell you the truth, it is expedient, it is necessary for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, will not come unto you, but if I depart, I will send him unto you. And when he is come, the Holy Spirit, he will have a three-step process that he will save you in. He will reprove the world of sin, and of righteousness, and of judgment." So there's this three-step testing process of the work of the Holy Spirit. We see it worded in different ways, but it always comes to the same conclusion. So what I'm suggesting is that this class of people here is going to develop into two groups, and it's going to begin with the message of sin, moving over to righteousness, and then judgment. This is the three-step testing process. This is the everlasting gospel. We can see in this global schematic that we have the first angel, the second angel, and then the third angel. And what we've done is we've encapsulated all of this information and are saying that it's also being performed at a micro level just here. So, in the book of Ezekiel, beginning from chapter 1, it talks about this concept of having wheels that are wrapped in wheels. It talks about wheels within wheels. And this is what's being demonstrated here, that there's this wheel here, this complete truth, which is within a larger wheel here, or a larger framework. And this wheel here, or this truth, contains all the same components, the same thoughts and ideas and concepts that are on this larger framework. If you read Revelation 14, verses 6 and 7, you will see demonstrated in that first angel's message this very same concept. That in the first angel, you can see all the components of the three angels. Because in the first angel's message, it says, fear God, because you're a sinner. Give him glory, reflect righteousness in your life, for the hour of his judgment has come. So you can see this principle of a wheel within a wheel identified in the everlasting gospel of Revelation 14, verses 6 to 11. So this group of people, this generation, are going to come to a testing point, and they're going to be identified as sinners. Both groups are sinners, but this group are going to be divided into two groups. This group here, after being told that they're sinners, are going to accept this truth about their condition, and they're going to change. They're going to change their wicked ways, and they're going to begin to exhibit righteousness. And this righteousness will be exhibited until they come to a point of judgment, when their cases will be decided. The second group here are also identified as being sinners, but they reject this message and they receive a moral fall, and they will then come to judgment too. This group to everlasting life, and this group to eternal death. So we can understand really simply how the everlasting gospel works when it tests two groups of worshippers upon a three-step testing message, depending on how they respond to this message. First identifying that they are both sinners, then expecting righteousness to be exhibited, and then receiving judgment. Now we know that it produces two classes of people, because in the passage that I just read out of John chapter 16 verse 8, it said the work of the Holy Spirit was to convict of sin and of righteousness and of judgment. This is the everlasting gospel three-step testing process: sin, righteousness and judgment. But if you go to Revelation 18 verse 8, the second angel's message there is not a message of righteousness, it's a message that identifies that this group of people have fallen. So at this stage here, as I've identified in this simple schematic, you've got one group that are exhibiting righteousness, John chapter 16 verse 8, and a second group who have fallen, Revelation 14 verse 8. We know, when we understand the right history, by the time they got to April 19, 1844, a number of things happened. But one of the things that they began to realise is that they had a misconception on the parable of the 10 virgins. In the parable of the 10 virgins, they saw the wise and the foolish. And they identified this parable back in this history here, without ever realising all that was going on. And when they identified the wise and the foolish, they identified the wise as being Protestants, the Protestant churches, or Christians, and the foolish as the world. Or they might call them the worldlings. So you've got the Protestants who are the wise, and you've got people in the world who are the foolish. That's how they initially identified the parable of the 10 virgins. But by the time they got to April 19, 1844, they were forced to reevaluate their explanation and their understanding of the parable of the 10 virgins. So it's at that point there that they realised that they were incorrect in their understanding of the identification of the wise and foolish. They began to see that in fact the wise and the foolish were not the Protestant churches and the world, but they were being identified as themselves. So we're going to mark that here, and we're going to say that there's a group of people that have come out of this testing process who are the Millerites. So they've gone through a three-step testing process, and the Millerites have passed, and the Protestants have fallen away. So because we have a number 3 here, and we've identified a number 3 as a close of probation, this is identifying the close of probation in type of the Protestant churches in this history. The Millerites are going to go through their own three-step testing process, the everlasting gospel, and then we have just identified here that they've realised that this model of the wise and foolish virgin are not Protestants and worldlings, they are in fact themselves. So we can identify that the Millerites are formed of two groups, the wise and the foolish. And they begin their three-step testing process here. 1, 2, 3. And they'll go through a similar process as we've just sketched out here, but the wise will recognise who and what they are, and they'll exhibit righteousness, and eventually come to judgment, whereas the foolish will exhibit a moral fault, and eventually, when they come to judgment, they'll be outside the door and they'll be inside the door, as identified in the parable of the 10 virgins. So it's here, the midnight cry in the parable, we're all familiar, that the wise virgins abide in Christ, they come to the bridegroom, but the foolish virgins go back into the marketplace, into the world. In the vision that Ellen White had, they're on this narrow path and they fall into the wicked world below. This is identifying what happens to these foolish virgins. They walk away from Christ, exhibit a fall, and eventually left worshipping and praying to Satan. So this is a simple schematic of the Millerite history. But I just want to introduce, can you raise all this there? Over this bottom part. I'll do it in a moment. So I want to identify some other portions of this history. We've identified here that Revelation 14 verse 8 was fulfilled. But I want to go back into some history of why that occurred. So this is to do with how you calculate dates. If this is the year 1843, we normally go from January to December. That's how we calculate our years. Now the Millerites were using a combination of calculations, but they were fixed from the very beginning to understand that when they were looking at these years, they would use a Jewish religious year as their start. Now the Jews work on a solar calendar in the same way that we do. So they would have a full year, but they would not begin their year in the winter in January, they would begin their year in the spring. So the Millerites understood this, and when they saw prophecy being fulfilled, they would mark 1843 in this fashion, between the spring and the spring, and this would be 1843. Now if I add on 1844 here, you can see here that this is where 1844 would be. This would be January 1844, and this is the spring of 1844. So can everybody just see it from that simple schematic? Why they come to the conclusion that the end of their prophecy is going to occur here in the spring of 1844. Because the spring of 1844 is the end of 1843. So on this chart here, they call it the 1843 chart because it identifies the year 1843 in a number of calculations. And they didn't have clarity at which portion of the year Christ was going to come. So they waited and waited and waited until they got to the very end. And when the very end occurred, then they found themselves in trouble. Now there were some developments and a calculation of the end of this year. And I put April the 19th. And April the 19th here, I'm marking as the first day of the first month of the year 1844. So April 18th would have been the last day. So the end of 1843 would be April the 18th. Then the first day of 1844 would be April the 19th. So does that make sense? Yeah? That's pretty easy to understand. Now there's some complexity in the development of this date, which we're not going to go into, but they had various dates coming up to this point. Because as their understanding developed and became clearer, they began to see how to define what the end of a Jewish year was. Initially they would just use the vernal equinox, which is in the spring where you've got a day and a night time, both equally 12 hours. And so everybody's familiar that on June 21st, December 21st, you've got the longest day and the shortest day. So everybody familiar with that? You all know that.
March.
Halfway through that time period between December and June, halfway through that, you would get the point where a day would be exactly the same length as a night. They'd both be 12 hours. So that point there is called the vernal equinox, and that occurs in March. So initially, the Millerites thought that the Jews were going from the vernal equinox to the vernal equinox, which would be March to March. But as their understanding grew, they began to see that it was not that straightforward, but there were some complexities in that. And they had to factor in another portion of Jewish custom or Jewish law, which was to do with the barley harvest. I think we may be familiar that Passover occurs on the 14th day of the first month. 2 days later, and in the line of Christ, that was the Sunday that he resurrected. He was crucified on the Friday, rested over Sabbath, and then on that third day when he resurrected, that day in the Jewish economy is the way sheep offering. It's where the first fruits of barley are cut and they're waved before the Lord before the initial harvest. So they began to understand that concept that there needed to be a barley harvest, and that impacts when the start of the year is going to occur, because it can either occur in April or it can occur a month earlier in March. In this particular year, the Millerites year, it actually occurred in April. So you may have heard arguments on the internet to say that Adventists are wrong in picking up October 22nd, and it should actually be in the month of September if you're going to pick this date here when you get the Day of Atonement, that we're a month out. And the reason for that argument is all based upon this understanding of when the Jews recorded the beginning of their year. Was it based solely upon the vernal equinox and the cycle of the moon, or did you need to factor in when there was going to be a barley harvest? So we all understand prophetically and symbolically that you would have to have a barley harvest factored in. So we know, and it's been proven many times at quite high academic levels, that April 19th is the correct date. Now once they reach that date, as I say, a number of things begin to happen. The first thing is they realise that their prophecy has failed and they need to understand what's gone wrong. So when they read back over their experience and they read back into Habakkuk chapter 2, which helped them to come to an understanding that they should produce this chart, because they realised that they needed to make the message that they were given, which was a complex message, and lay it out in some kind of visual plan or a template, so that those who took the message could do it in a consistent fashion, and those who received the message could see a graphical representation of what was being taught. But they didn't notice in Habakkuk chapter 2 that it talks about a tarrying time. But at this point here, they realise that they're now in a tarrying time. And what that means practically is that now time has run out And now they have to wait upon the Lord to see where He's going to direct. Because in the passage it says, though it tarries, or though it appears to tarry, it doesn't really tarry. So they realise that they've made a mistake here. But along with that tarrying time, there's a disappointment. A disappointment occurs. Now this disappointment at this tarrying time are all factored in this history in relationship to Revelation 14 verse 8, because now the Protestant churches are going to start attacking those Millerites and mocking them, suggesting that they've got all their prophecy wrong, that it's all a waste of time and it was all a lie. And not only do they mock them, they begin to persecute them. And in this persecution, the Millerites, having this self-awareness that they are in fact fulfilling the parable of the 10 virgins and not the Protestants in the world, they begin to give a call out of Babylon, and they instruct those Millerites who are still in the churches to leave. They instruct those Millerites in the Protestant churches to leave, and they use the phraseology of Revelation 14 verse 8 to come out of Babylon. Now we know in Revelation 13 that the United States is a lamb-like beast, and it has 2 horns. So 2-horned beast. And these 2 horns, we know, represent Protestantism and Republicanism, or church and state. And the reason why the United States is strong is because they maintain the separation between the 2. Ellen White, when commenting on this history here, when she talks about Babylon is fallen and this message that's being delivered, she says it was not a complete fulfillment of Revelation 14 verse 8. It was only partially fulfilled, or we would say imperfectly fulfilled. The Millerites identify that the Protestant churches at this state here have now fallen and have become part of Babylon. And because of that, they have an instruction of the Millerites who are still in those churches, and there were many thousands, to come out and separate from those churches. And so this dynamic here, where we have the United States being represented by 2 horns of Protestantism and Republicanism, we can identify that the first horn of the United States fell, and it's the horn of Protestantism, fell on April 19, 1844, at the arrival of the second angel's message. Ellen White says that the message of the second angel was not preached, or she says was first preached in the summer of 1844. The scenario that we have here, at the time of the end, when the first angel's message arrived in 1798, that there's an increase of knowledge, there is not anyone really preaching the message in its infancy, but as the knowledge increases, or an awareness of what's happening increases, then the message begins to be delivered. The judgment hour has come, that God's people need to be ready. And this scenario happens here. There's an increase of knowledge that goes on here, so even though the arrival of the second angel is marked at this day, it's not first preached until the summer. I want to mark another date here, and this is July 20th. Now in July 20th, at the Boston Tabernacle, a brother called Samuel Snow, which I think we should reasonably be familiar with, gave his first major presentation on what was then to be called the Midnight Cry. He had already had an understanding of the Midnight Cry message and its dynamics and how it was working prior to this, but he received little success. But at July 20th, when he delivers this message in Boston, God's people begin to take hold of this message, and it begins to have clarity. But there are still only a few people who understand, and by the time you get to August 15th at the Exeter Camp meeting, then this message goes like wildfire, and the whole of the Millerite movement from this stage onward till they get to the end, October 22nd, everybody accepts it. But it began here on July 20th. And the fundamental thing that Samuel Snow understood, and he used various portions of scripture, but one of the key verses that he uses is Ezra 7:9, which we're going to have a look at, first began to be understood here. And what he teaches is this, that Christ isn't going to come back, the sanctuary isn't going to be cleansed in the spring of 1844, but in the autumn of 1844. And that's basically the crux of his argument. So he explains why nothing happened in the spring of 1844, because he identifies that Christ would have to come in the autumn. And he has some very good arguments. There's 4 or 5 arguments that he uses to develop that. But one of the key ones that he uses is Ezra 7:9. I think I've explained, no, I don't think I've explained, why you get the first angel's message arriving and its empowerment here. We understand that when the testimony of 2 things is established, and we understand that at the arrival of the first angel at the time of the end, where the message of the judgment hour is given, it's to deal with the unsealing of the book of Daniel in relation to time. And it's the time of the 2300 days. At this time here, they begin to understand that in the Bible, a day refers to a year. But they don't have any secondary reference point to solidify this truth that's being developed and understood. It's only 42 years later, on August 11th, 1840, and I think we're all familiar with this history, that 2 years before this, in 1838, Dr. Josiah Litch predicted, using this principle, day for year, that radical Islam in Egypt was going to be restrained in accordance with the prophecy that's given in Revelation 11. And when that prediction happened, based upon the same rules and principles that were used to identify the 2300 days, ending in 1843/1844, we have 2 testimonies that day for year is correct, and from this point here the message was empowered. So it took these 2 steps to identify that this message is correct, both using the same principle. Once God had proven to his people that this is the true message, the test would begin. So that's why we mark this is the beginning of the testing period and not 1798. Because here you've only got a testimony of 1, you need a testimony of 2 before God's people can be tested. First the Protestants, then the Millerites. 2 temple cleansings. One of the things that I alluded to earlier this morning, but I didn't identify it because we haven't laid out this reform line, we already understand here the time of the end. I want to read a short passage to you. It's taken from manuscript 136 and it's dated 1897. Manuscript 136, 1897. So the reason why this little passage is important is because it's given in the time period post-1888 when the first angel's message of Revelation 18 is empowering the work of the third angel. We spoke about that this morning when we referenced manuscript release 21 and Great Controversy 611. When you tie those 2 passages together, you can see that when the messages of 1840 to 44 are made forcible now, It's in the context or the reference point of the third angel being empowered by the end of Revelation 18. So this is the time period that's being referred to in the passage that we're reading. So 1888 was typifying this history. That history wasn't complete. It didn't go on to the second and the third angel in the history of Wagner and Jones. And so it's been left to our generation for that work to be completed. But the context of this is interesting. It says this: and many are doing the same work today in 1897. They're doing the same work as a previous generation had done. And I'm suggesting that this previous generation that she's referring to is this generation here, that lived here. God's people are doing the same thing now in 1897 that was done in a previous generation. Many are doing the same thing today in 1897, and this is the reason. Because they have not had experience in the testing messages comprehended in the first, second, and third angel's messages. There are those who are searching the scriptures for proof that these messages are still future. So Ellen White has clearly identified that in 1897, she identified it before this date, that the angel of Revelation 18 had already come down, the third angel was being empowered. And she understood that the work of the everlasting gospel is a three-step testing process, and when this angel would come down in Revelation 18, it would come down in the sequence of 1, 2, and 3. But those people who haven't had an experience prior to this of the first, second, and third angel's messages didn't understand that. In fact, if you factor in what we spoke about this morning, they were dull of hearing. They refused to hear and accept what was being taught. And so what they try to do is they try and take the whole message of Revelation 18 and squash it down into a single message, a single event, and they try to push it forward so it's not in their current history. So I'm contending that that's exactly what's going on today in our history. That we're taking the work. Let me draw it out here so you can understand what I'm saying. If this is marking 1844, October 22nd, we know this marks the beginning of the third angel's message. It's running through history, and then at some point, the angel of Revelation 18 is going to come down as a single event, and for God's people in this history in 1897, they're here and we're here too. So we could put 1897 or we could put 2015. These are not prophetic dates, I just use those as an example. So we want to make the work of the fourth angel, Revelation 18, a future event. And just going to explain why. There are those who are searching the scriptures for proof that these messages are still future. They gather together the truthfulness of the messages. So what they do is they call these messages just an experience, a personal experience that you can have in your heart. But they fail to give them their proper place in prophetic history. So I'm contending that's what the church did in this history, and that's what we're doing today in our history. So she refers back to the first, second, and third angel's message, and we can identify that Revelation 18 comes in the three-step process: 1, 2, 3. But if you just gather together the truthfulness of these messages and fail to give them their proper place in prophetic history, then you're going to fall into the trap that number 1 and number 2 are not prophetic events. Everybody accepts that the third is, because we understand according to Revelation 14 verses 9 to 11, that this is dealing with the mark of the beast or the Sunday law. So everybody understands that the third angel is not only an experience, but it's an event. And everybody knows in 1897 or 2015 it's a future event. But what we do is we turn the first and second angel's messages into experiences without recognising that they are events that were fulfilled in prophetic history. She's going to explain a bit further. They gather together the truthfulness of the messages, but they fail to give them their proper place in prophetic history. Therefore, such are in danger of misleading the people in regard to locating the messages. So if you turn these messages, particularly number 1 and number 2, and fail to give them their proper place in prophetic history, what you end up doing is you are in danger of misleading the people in regard to locating their messages. So the people are now misguided, they no longer understand, and they're being misled because these messages have been taken out of their context in prophetic history. So there are no waymarks being identified by these messages. They just want to take the truthfulness of the experiences that are spoken there, and then they push everything into the future. And this is how they do it, this is why they do it. They do not see and understand the time of the end, or when to locate the messages. So the reason they get into this mire is because we know that the first angel's message arrives at the time of the end. They fail to see the time of the end. They don't even recognise that it exists. And in doing that, they fail to locate where the messages are. So if you don't fail to locate, or don't even believe that there's a time of the end, you'll fail to locate the second waymark, and you will expect everything to happen in the third waymark. This is what's being fulfilled in our history. Now, when Ellen White gave this statement here, we know that 1888 will be here, and Ellen White's quite clear that this event here, number 1, actually occurred here. So it occurred before 1897. But these men who are rising up in resistance want to turn this work of the first angel into an experience. They don't want to locate the messages of prophetic history because they don't accept or recognise that it comes down at the time of the end. He then goes on to say, the day of God is coming with stealthy tread, but the supposed wise and great men, this is the leadership of the church, are prating about higher education. They know not the signs of Christ's coming or of the end of the world. Now the church thinks that they're experts in looking at the signs of Christ's near approach. But this statement that we've just read says that they're prating about higher education and they do not recognise the signs of Christ coming. So typically when we talk about the signs of Christ coming, we talk about wars and rumours of war in a generic sense. We talk about pestilence and disease and famine and the breakup of nature. But these aren't the signs. I'll read it here. They know not the signs of Christ coming or of the end of the world. Because in our day and age, the sign that we need to be looking for is Islam. Islam is the marker for us to know the nearness of Christ. And it's understanding where Islam fits into this framework of the everlasting gospel that we're able to see the nearness of Christ coming. But if you don't recognise that the first and second angel's messages are more than experiences, that they're located in prophetic history, and you don't have a means of identifying when the time of the end occurs, then you're going to push everything into the future. So that's an important passage for us to understand, in my opinion. In accordance with Daniel 11, verse 40, it marks that at the time of the end, the king of the south comes to make war against the king of the north. And it says that it happens at the time of the end. The second part of the verse says at the time of the end, the king of the north is going to come against the king of the south. And we can identify this history here as occurring in 1798 when France comes to make war against the papacy and delivers a deadly wound to it. I don't have the time to explain the proof for this, but in 1989, the papacy, with the means and help of America, comes to make war with the USSR. And what we want to understand about the USSR is that it's not a country, it's a union of states. And what the papacy does, it dismantles this unity. The states remain intact, but it dismantles the unity. And this occurred in 1989. And I think we're reasonably familiar with that. What we may not be familiar with is that one of the catalysts for this event was that there was a war between the USSR, in this history here, and Islam. This war raged for around a decade, and it was the war between the Soviet Union and radical Islam in Afghanistan. And through the aid of America, Islam here was strengthened to make battle against the USSR, and it weakened and crippled that union, so that by the time you came to 1989, they'd been so demoralized in their experience, as well as financially, that it didn't take much to topple them over. So we can identify that Islam can be seen at the time of the end. And we know that when a testimony of two of things is established, so when we identified, or when it was identified, looking back, not looking forward. When you are looking back and you see that this event has occurred, and there's an increase of knowledge, that this is not the work of a human being, it's the work of the Holy Spirit, identifying these events as having prophetic significance, we could see that we're now entering the time of the end. By 1996, the message had been formalised in the form of a booklet called The Time of the End magazine. But we still only had a testimony of one. And the principle that was being used here was that history was being repeated. And it was being repeated line upon line. We had to wait till September 11th, 2001, when once again radical Islam was restrained for us to identify that indeed history had been repeated, because now we have a testimony of two. So we see Islam marked here, and we see Islam marked here. Around 2005, after some providential leadings of the Lord, an investigation was made of the 1850 chart in connection with the 1843 chart in relation to the 2520. I've already identified that the work of the antagonists is a cause and effect relationship with the foundation. So these charts, when they came back into history around 2005, and 2520 is not the only issue that's on this chart that's being contended. There are two others, the other being the daily and Islam. And when I refer to Islam, I refer to the first and second row. Is traditional Adventist understanding on the first and second row is depicted on these charts correct or not? these three things have been warned against by our own church. So when you start looking at this history here, and you can see there's a cause and effect relationship between these two events, you can begin to see the significance of the charts when they come back into history, and how these three points of reference are now going to be the issue that there's going to be a struggle over in God's church. And if you mix in the same circles that I do, which you probably do, we know that the 2520 is the premier figure or issue or point of reference that's on these charts that people struggle with. And we're familiar with the 1863 chart, and what I haven't done is go back into this history here and show you the relationship between the 1863 chart and the 2520 was rejected and its relationship to the 1989, but there is a relationship between the two. So we know here that 9/11 marks the empowerment of the first angel's message, as 1989 marks the arrival of the first angel's message. I'm going to paraphrase it, but if you go to Life Sketches 4:11 and you go into, you can pick it up from 9 Testimonies, page 11, and read through the chapter, Ellen White has a vision and makes some comments, and she talks about the great buildings of New York being toppled or attacked or being brought down by the turning and overturning of God's power. So we identify at 9/11 the work of the destruction of these towers was not the work of a man or a power or the globalists or Islam, but it was the work of God, because God was behind that. And she says when that event occurs, that Revelation 18 verses 1 to 3 will be fulfilled. So if we were to read Revelation 18 verses 1 to 3, it says this: "So another angel come down, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory." And if you read the first two words of Revelation 18 verse 2, it says, "And he cried mightily." So you can identify in Revelation 18 verses 1 and 2 and into 3 that it's the same angel that's being identified. Because in verse 2 it says, "He," the angel that's brought to view in verse 1, cries mightily. And when he cries, he is repeating the narrative of Revelation 14 verse 8, but with some additional information. Because now it says that Babylon has become the cage of every hateful and unclean bird. Now it's full and complete. It's fully made up. So Ellen White says that at 9/11, Revelation 18 verse 1 and verses 2 to 3 are fulfilled at the same time. I'm just going to rub out this information here.
What's the information on that?
What I've just write down?
Yeah,
2005, you've got the 1843 chart and the 1850 chart, and below that, the three issues that are the cause of antagonism on those charts: the 2520, the daily, and Islam.
Another piece of information.
And I think that was it.
Another bit of information.
I can't remember the other piece of information was. It's on the video. It's on the video. So I'm just going to mark here the 2520. So the angels of Revelation 18, sorry, the singular angel, verses 1 and 2 and 3 arrive at the same time. Ellen White is describing characteristics of the angel of Revelation 18 verse 1 mark it as the angel of Revelation 10 who came down in 1840. So we have the empowerment of the first angel and the empowerment of the first angel here, Revelation 10, Revelation 18 verse 1. But then it talks about, in verse 2 and 3, that Babylon has fallen. So here we see the arrival of the second angel's message. This is 9/11. So we see two events occurring at 9/11. The empowerment of the first and the arrival of the second. I'm going to put here these two charts as symbolised by this waymark. Now sometimes this confuses people, but I'm going to make an explanation of it. I'm going to identify this waymark here as this waymark here. So this is going to be the Sunday law, which is the close of probation. And we'll explain why in a moment. So we see in this history here a 1, a 2, and a 3-step testing process. I had it down here and I erased it. And here we see a 1, a 2, and a 3. So the simplest way that I can explain this is to say that where you have the number ones, you can line up number ones together. It's a crude but factually correct statement that if you go anywhere in the scriptures and you identify where a number 1 would be, for instance the baptism of Christ, you can take the baptism of Christ and you can get that event, that history, and bring it down and lay it over this event here. So most of you are familiar with that concept. And you can take the story of Moses, when an angel comes down ready to kill Moses when he's returning back to Egypt because of the lack of circumcision, that he's in sin, because this is where we mark sin, that he's under a life-threatening situation, he's about to be killed, so there's a life and death message there, a salvational message that comes because he's a sinner. We can see these events being laid over. So if we understand that concept, then the concept that I'm explaining now isn't hard to understand. But if we see that this is a 3-step testing process for the Protestants, and we saw that this was a 3-step testing process for the Millerites, where you see this number 1 here, and this number 1 here, you can line them up. So the 1s would line up, the 2s would line up, and the 3s would line up. The arguments are slightly more sophisticated than that, but that's a really simple and crude way of understanding it, that when you see the number 1s, you can line them up in these mini segments here. There are a number of quotes that Ellen White has, I don't have time to read them this evening, where she says that the messages are required to be combined. So we also have license from Ellen White to say that this first angel's message and the second angel's message at the end of the world will be combined and they arrive at the same time. So we have this concept. I've given you 3 simple examples. The first one was that we're told explicitly that the angel of Revelation verses 1, 2 and 3, it's a single angel, arrives when the buildings in New York are brought down. So we know that the angel of Revelation 18 verses 1 to 3 is a single angel with 2 messages. So we have a number 1 and number 2. I've also shown you from the Protestant and the Millerite history that you can overlay this history over this one in exactly the same way that we get Christ's history, which we could in imagination see above here, and we'd overlay that on this history. We'd see a 1, a 1, a 2 and a 3 with a big night cry in Christ history and overlay it on that. If we can do that, then we can take this history and overlay it on this history as well. So it's not anything that you're particularly unfamiliar with. And the third argument is that Ellen White says when these angels come down, that we're to combine the messages. So we have the license to combine the first and the second angel's message together. So this 1, 2 and 3, I'm going to put here 1, 2 and 3. So in this history here, we can see that there was an empowerment, a restraint of Islam, that the charts, which were the foundation of our message, to be repeated with forcibly, Ellen White says, at the end of the world. This is just number 2 that's being lined up. There's a work of the enemies that goes on in this history here. And we can see that this work of the enemy is the work of the conference structure against this message. And we can line up the closing vibration right here at the number 3. We can also take this history and see that when this number 1 comes down here, there's this number 1, that we should expect to enter into a tarrying time and to receive a disappointment in this history. Miller White teaches that the tarrying time ended on August the 15th at the midnight cry. And then there was a shut door, which is the shut door that we have here. We're told that there are 2 temple cleansings at the end of the world, as there was at the beginning of Adventism, and as there will be at the end of Adventism. And this is the temple cleansing of the church, and this is the temple cleansing of the world. And in fact, the world will itself go through a 3-step testing process, and we refer to this as the loud cry. And this event is Daniel 12, where Michael stands up. So most of what I've drawn here, I'm guessing is familiar territory to many of you. But I want to focus a little bit of time now on this history here, specifically this history here. And I just want to spend a few moments just going over this calendation issue in a little bit more detail. Okay? So what we're going to do is, we're going to look at this history here, which is April the 19th, 1844, August the 15th, 1844, and October 22nd, 1844, which line up in our history as 9/11, the Midnight Cry, and the Sunday Law. So let's turn to Ezra 7:9. Ezra 7, verse 9. Oh, before we do that, I forgot to mention one other point. Here we marked that the Protestant horn of the United States fell at the arrival of the second angel's message. But we know that America is a 2-horned beast. And we know here that the second horn, or the state, fell at 9/11. So I just want to read a verse to show that before we go to Ezra. If we go to Psalms 48, if you remember in Revelation chapter 18, verses 2 and 3, it says it's become the cage of every hateful bird. And most of us have a working knowledge of Revelation 17. You know, in Revelation 17, there are a beast with these heads, there's a woman riding upon this beast, and there's reference made to 10 kings. So these 10 kings we understand to be the United Nations. We understand that before the United Nations make their Sunday law, that the United States right here will make its Sunday law, and we know who the woman is, the Papal Church. But we also know that the United States is part of the United Nations, so there's some interaction between the United States and the United Nations. But reading Psalms 48, it says, "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness. Beautiful is the situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. God is known in her palaces for a refuge. For lo, the kings," these are the 10 kings of Revelation 17, "were assembled. They passed by Jerusalem, looking at it. They saw it, and so they marveled. They were troubled and hasted away." So before we read on, at 9/11, the kings of the earth, the 10 kings, were all assembled together, ready to come and destroy Jerusalem. But they hesitate and don't fulfill the work that they want to do. It says, "Fear took hold upon them there, and pain as a woman in travail." So they begin to feel pain. And the reason why it talks about as a woman in travail is because a woman in travail is a woman who's pregnant. And he talks about, from this event here, they're going to start feeling a progressive pain, just as a woman does when she's travailing in birth. So the pain isn't a one-point pain, it's a progressive pain. And then it explains what's causing them with these issues. "Fear took hold upon them there, and pain as a woman in travail. Thou breakest the ships of Tarshish with an east wind." So, we don't have time to prove this, but the east wind of Bible prophecy is a reference to the four winds of Revelation 7. This is Islam. The reason why the kings, when they were assembled here to come and destroy Jerusalem, didn't do their task is because God identified that his people hadn't been sealed, and he sent an east wind, and that east wind scared and distracted them, and they would start looking at some other projects, and we were left to be sealed from 9/11 to the Sunday law time period. And the reason that they were going to come and destroy Jerusalem is because right here, and we understand the destruction of Jerusalem occurs here, we know that the Sunday law was ready to be passed right there.
Can you demonstrate it? Like Sunday?
Sorry?
Sunday was going to be passed around there. You can just demonstrate it a little bit more.
So I can't prove it because it never happened, but that's one demonstration that verses 2 and 3, the threefold alliance has been fully formed. So when we see in Ellen White's writings when the threefold union is fully formed, we tend to bring it into this history here, but it was already formed here. But the east wind had restrained them.
I'm not trying to speak.
I understand, yeah.
Because this is the Jeff on that, and it says that the Sunday law was going to be passed in September 9/11. And I want to know, how was the Sunday law going to be passed? And is there any documentation or anything like that?
There isn't any documentation. Ellen White says the Sunday law is being promulgated in darkness, but it's from the logic that when you see the first four trumpets coming upon Rome, it's in response to a Sunday law that they initiated. When you go to the first and second row, fifth and sixth trumpet, they were brought upon Rome for making a Sunday law, and so now the third woe is going to be brought upon Rome for making a Sunday law. So we normally identify that as Islam being introduced into history here, but we know that Islam came into history here. So the fact that they were brought into history and attacked the 10 kings who had formed this alliance.
So really, it's speculation.
If you want to call it speculation, I wouldn't use that phraseology, because I know that's a phraseology that many people use against many of the arguments that we have against these truths. They consider those to be speculation. We would argue otherwise.
Ezra 7:9.
Yeah, so I'm going to go through Ezra 7:9 now. So let's go to Ezra 7:9. Let's read Ezra 7:9 first. For upon the first day of the first month began he, this is Ezra, to go up from Babylon, and on the first of the fifth month came into Jerusalem according to the good hand of his God upon him. So, in this passage, he talks about the first day of the first month. Then it mentions the first day of the fifth month. We've already identified that April 19th, 1844 was the first day of the first month. We have documentation to demonstrate that, but we don't have time to show that. Because we've lined up this event here with this event here, we know that April 19th, 1844 and 9/11 are the first day of the first month. When you go back into Millerite history, you can identify that year to the very day that August the 15th lined up with the first day of the fifth month. So we have the first day of the fifth month. Also in Millerite history, on July 20th, we can identify that July 20th marked a specific day. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 1. So it says in Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 1, Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the fourth month, in the fifth day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chebar, that the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. So if you read through Ezekiel chapter 1 and into chapter 2, you know what this vision is referring to. This is the vision of wheels within wheels. And I'm referring to this imagery that's being brought to view here, that there's this wheel and it has wheels within it. Now I'm not just making that up in reference to Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 1, but on July 20th 1844 we read what the date was. It said in the fourth month, in the fifth day of the month. So on the fifth day of the fourth month in Millerite history, this event occurred. This is the fifth day of the fourth month, and this marked up with July 20th. And we know on July 20th at the Boston Tabernacle, there was an understanding by God's people. This is when the start really happened, that they understood the time of their visitation. This is what marked the beginning of the midnight cry. So the midnight cry begins here when God's people understand that Ezra 7:9 is being fulfilled and that Christ isn't going to come in the spring, but it's going to come in the in the autumn. It begins here, but it swells to a loud cry in the midnight cry. So this event here, July 20th, is the fifth day of the fourth month in Millerite history. These days were literally fulfilled on these biblical dates. First of the first month, first of the fourth month, so fifth day of the fourth month, first day of the fifth month. And here they understand. And I'm contending that an understanding of this information, which was all connected in this history here, of the nearness of Christ, once they realised they were in the tarrying time, very soon after they realised they were in the tarrying time, they began to understand that they were entering into the midnight cry, because on July 20th, they began to understand what the significance of Ezra 7:9 was and related truths. That Christ wasn't going to come here, but he was going to come here. And July 20th works out to be the 5th day of the 4th month, which is a fulfillment of Ezekiel 1:1, which is a wheel within a wheel. So this complexity of understanding this dynamic between this large wheel and these smaller wheels that share exactly the same patterns, and how an understanding of that explains many of the things that we haven't understood clearly before. One of them being that at 9/11 the first and the second angel's messages arrive at the same time, which is built upon an understanding of this wheels within wheels, that you can get one wheel and another wheel within a larger wheel. All of this began to be understood last year, around June of last year. So what I'm contending is that for about the last 12 months, we've been in the time period of the midnight cry. But we haven't got to the time period of August 15th, 1844, where this great crescendo happened, and there are many events that start happening from that point. But we're in the beginning of the time period of the midnight cry, based upon a principle that has been understood of Ezra 7:9. That when the first day of the first month, it lined up with April 19th, 1844, first day of the 5th month lined up with August the 15th. And of course we understand that the 10th day of the 7th month, which was also an argument that Samuel Snow developed and understood from Ezra 7, lined up with October 22nd, 1844. This is a piece of logic, or what you might call speculation on his part, that it was going to occur here, because he had no proof that it would, but he based it upon an understanding of these two pieces of information. And what he didn't identify, but which we can now identify, is that the July 20th day, which all the Millerites recognised as the commencement of the midnight cry, and Ellen White even refers to it when she says it was first preached in the summer. She's referring to this event here. Actually relates back to a prophecy that's given, or a vision that's given on the 5th day of the 4th month in Ezekiel chapter 1, which is to do with the wheels upon wheels, which is the information that's now being decoded, if I can use that phraseology, to understand the dynamics of this history and bring it about into our history, so we can understand with some clarity the things that are going on today. So that's why I'm suggesting that we're already now, from 12 months ago, in the midnight cry time period. I want to, I do realise, and I'm not going to, because of lateness of time, that I haven't explained how you get from a first day of the first month and the first day of the 5th month and translate this back, because this is a Hebrew calendation, and you've got a Hebrew calendation and you're going to map it over a Gregorian calendation, and to do that you need to also understand the biblical calendation, because they're three different things. So we know that when we calculate the present time, we use 12 months and we use 30 days per month. Everybody knows that? Yeah? That is not real life time. It's not how the world operates. It's not how the Hebrews operated. The Hebrew year had 30 days, 29 days, 30 days, 29 days. And then they had leap months and various years at the end of their calendar. They had a pragmatic calendar in the same way that we do. So there's a relationship between these three calendars, a biblical calendar, the Hebrew calendar, and our Gregorian calendar, to factor in, to understand how you go from here and superimpose those dates upon them. So you kind of have to take my word upon it, or do some research on your own to validate that. Now, the interesting thing that we want to see, and I guess I think I'm late sometime, because we might have a Q&A. I want to just, so I've identified this as sometime last year. This started to be, it was understood at some kind of level a short while before that, but it came to the public domain last year, 12 months ago, as it did here, July 20th. It was understood before this, but it entered into the public domain. Articles were written from this stage onwards, and it was preached again at a major church, and then things just started spreading after that. But I want to look at these times. On August 15th, 1844, if you read carefully the events of that meeting, the Exeter Camp meeting, you'll find that Samuel Snow actually arrived on the 14th. He arrives on the 14th and gives his presentation there. He arrives on a horse. And even at one level, what I'm going to suggest to you is that because you see a horse identified in this history here, we can mark Islam here. That is not a real proof, but I'm just observing it here. He preaches his message twice, first on the 14th, and he repeats the message on the 15th. So he preaches the message twice because this is the midnight cry, and it's the empowerment of the second angel's message. So we can write here the empowerment of the second angel's message. If you calculate the time between these events, between the first day of the first month and the last day of the fourth month, I think I heard somebody say the calculation. It works out at 120 days. And if you work out between the 15th of August, which is the first day of the fifth month, and the 10th day of the seventh month, you get 70 days. And if you take these numbers and you run them through Scripture, they open up a whole new channel of light to understand certain things that are happening. So when you see people or numbers that are occurring, you can begin to understand many, many different truths. So one of the things that we might, but before I go into that, I'm just going to leave that for a moment. I just want to go back to this Islam point here. This is the midnight cry, and I don't know if you've all seen this before. If you go back to the line of Christ, Reformed line of Christ, at this point here, Ellen White marks that at this point here, the midnight cry, she typifies the midnight cry with the triumphal entry of Christ. And this is the triumphal entry of Christ. And you know at the triumphal entry of Christ, he calls the two asses, a mother and a colt, and he asks them to be loosed, because previous to this stage they'd been restrained. So they'd been tied up somewhere, and he tells his disciples, two disciples, to the account of the second, he tells them to loose the donkeys and bring them to him. So these donkeys that have been identified here at the midnight cry is another identification mark of Islam that's been brought to view here. And here we know that Islam was restrained according to Revelation 7, and in the Reformed line of Christ we're told here that Islam is loosed. There are other lines of prophecy which show this, but here there was an attack which for all intents and purposes, has brought down the world economy, because really we're just on borrowed time. So, at the midnight cry, August the 15th, 1844, and we're already past July 20th, that we're expecting a second attack. And we all know that once God's people have been sealed and the sealing completes at the Sunday law, that the winds are going to be loosed. So we know Islam is being identified there. So you can see Islam identified at all the cave waymarks where these angels are coming. The first, the second, the empowerment, and then the third. We're living in the time period of the third angel's message. It's been going from October 22nd, 1844, running through history. When the third angel's message arrives here, which is Revelation 18, verse 4, a call is made. It's another angel, because it says in 18, verse 4, I heard another voice. This other voice that's being spoken of here is a call out of Babylon. It's a loud cry that comes out. And it's at this point here that the third angel that's been running right through history becomes fully empowered. So this is the empowerment of the third angel's message. If it's empowered here, I want to suggest that the third angel's message actually arrives here at the midnight cry. If we go back to Ezra 7, verse 9, maybe we'll be able to see that. We know the history of Ezra 7:9. If you go back to verse 8, actually to verse 7, the last part of verse 7, this is the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. He came to Jerusalem, Ezra, in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. Can you read that? Verse 8, you can straight back. He came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was the 7th year of the king. This is King Artaxerxes. This is the 3rd decree. This is the year 457 BC. So in 457 BC, on the 1st day of the 1st month, they leave Babylon. On the 1st day of the 5th month, they enter into Jerusalem. How many times does it say that they entered into Jerusalem? It says once in verse 8 and once in verse 9. So it marks the 1st day of the 5th month twice, because it's right here at the midnight cry, identifying the number 2. We know that Ezra has the 3rd decree. What is the 3rd decree? The 3rd decree, the 3rd angel's message, is the message of the Sunday law, and he already has it in his hand on the 1st day of the 1st month. Amen. So I don't know if you see that as speculation, but you already can identify that the 3rd angel's message can be seen right here on the 1st day of the 1st month. And I'm suggesting the prophetic significance of that is that it's identifying the kings of Psalm 48 ready to make a Sunday law, because the 3rd angel's message is already arrived in history on the 1st day of the 1st month. On the 1st day of the 5th month, it says that the decree arrives in the glorious land, in Jerusalem. So we know that the 3rd decree has arrived now in the glorious land in the time period of the midnight cry. And what we understand that to mean is that from the midnight cry, we're going to have a series of blue laws or labour laws, which all of us understand about and have been expecting. They're going to be marked at this point here when Islam attacks. And then we all know that at the Sunday law, the 3rd angel's message will be empowered. So I know it's getting quite late, and I haven't had time to discuss these issues here, but I want to add one point, if I may. Here, we're expecting a decree to be issued. Yeah? Everybody knows that decrees will be issued by the United States implementing the Sunday law. We now understand that there's going to be a decree here at the midnight cry as well. And this decree is the decree that initiates the blue laws at the time when Islam attacks. There's always a relationship between a decree being issued and an attack by Islam. But when this attack happens, the restraint isn't going to be as effective as it was here. But the law that's being decreed here isn't a Sunday law, as we understand it, because we should really be putting the national Sunday law, which is a rejection of Sabbath and the exaltation of Sunday. But these blue laws have nothing to do with Sabbath worship. And so based upon the decree and the attack, we're making the suggestion that there was a decree and attack at 9/11 as well. So I just want to show, if I can find the verses for that passage there. If you go into the book of Esther, when we see the number 120, we can also see number 12. So, an example of this would be in the book of Acts, when they're all assembled together, there's 120 people, and at this stage here, where you see the 120 mark, there are only 11 disciples. So, the disciples here have not completed their number. So it's at this stage here when you see the 120 mark that the 12th apostle is re-established, and you see the completion of the 12. The reason why it's important to understand this relationship between the two here, I'm going to go back to to Esther in a moment, is that in the time of Christ, when Christ was resurrected, he was the first fruit. He resurrects on the 16th of the first month, and he's the first fruit. But we know in that history that he resurrected a second first fruit as well. Those people had already died. So the first fruits at the end of ancient Israel is marked as two groups of people. And as it was in ancient Israel, so it would be in modern Israel, the first fruits, which are all going to be here, these are the first fruits which precede the harvest of the world. The first fruits are going to come in two steps. This is the first fruit, and this is the second first fruit. This is the 70, and this is the 120. Another symbology for this is that this is the priests, and this is the Levites. The priests and the Levites. Now that I've just tackled the priests and Levites, before we go to Esther, let's just go back to Ezra 7, and actually I think it's in Ezra 8, Ezra 7. So we're going to Ezra chapter 8, verse 15. When Ezra leaves Babylon on the first day of the first month, we're going to see that the priests are ready. Verse 15, and I gathered them together to the river that runneth to Ahava, and there abode we in tents 3 days. Those 3 days are referring to this three-step testing process, 1, 2, 3. It's the everlasting gospel. And it says, and I viewed the people and the priests, and found there none of the sons of Levi. So when he reviews the people that are with him, at this point here, he sees that the priests are ready, but there are no Levites. There's going to be a three-step testing process for the priests, and then there's going to be a second call for the Levites. We won't read the verses, but if you read down the verses, he goes and makes a second call and he says, we need some Levites, and these Levites come out. So there's these two calls. The priests are ready here, but the Levites aren't. At the midnight cry, the Levites are going to come out. One thing I didn't mark here is that the thing that happened, Ellen White uses the phrase the living testimony. So we can put here also the living testimony at the midnight cry. And the living testimony is the combination of humanity and divinity. which is the same symbology of these charts. And the White says that these charts were divine. They were given to us by vision and inspiration, yet they were the handiwork of man. So they're a combination of the human and divine. They're a visual symbol that we can see, and the living testimony is also a visual symbol that we can see. And it's this living testimony that this group of people here, these Levites here, are going to see at the end of the world, that's going to draw them out from the conference churches to come and join us. So I just want to identify here, if I can do it quickly, that there's going to be a decree at the midnight cry. It's based upon the information that we've developed here. So we're back in the book of Esther, and this will be my final closing point. You're familiar with the book of Esther. You have the king Ahasuerus, you have Haman the Agagite, who's the enemy of God's people, and he wants to come and destroy God's people, and he's going to make a decree against them. Okay? And let's drop down to verse 12, chapter 3, verse 12. Then will the king's scribe call on the 13th day of the first month. So I'm going to mark the 13th day of the first month. And what are they called for? They're called on the 13th day, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenant. So there's a decree made there. To destroy God's people, right here. If you go to Exodus chapter 8, verse 9, we're going to see that there's a second decree that's made. This is the counter decree that's going to be used to protect God's people. It says, 8 verse 9, and then when the king's scribes call, at that time, in the 3rd month, that is the month Shivan, on the 23rd day thereof. So there's another decree made here, on the 23rd day of the 3rd month. I'm not going to go through the calculations, but I leave it to you to work out. If you see the timing between this day and this day, it comes out at 70 days. And there's a decree made here, or a law, and there's a decree made here, or a law. And we're going to use the number 70 as the reference point to take, when we see 70s, and bring them into this history, because this history is the history between the midnight cry and the Sunday law. So we know that there's a law made at Sunday law, we already knew that, but now we understand that there's going to be a law, a decree made against God's people at the midnight cry. And we're identifying that to be the instigation at a minimum level of these blue laws, which is going to bring about an attack by Islam and the midnight cry. There are other lines of arguments, but we're running out of time to address that. So you can see the 70 marked here. If we drop back in Ezra chapter 3. In Ezra chapter 3, it doesn't tell you the date, it tells you the month. In Ezra chapter 3, verse 7. In the 1st month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur. Casting pur is like throwing dice. They're throwing lots to see when the attack is going to happen. That is the lot before Haman, from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. So what they're doing is, they're going to cast lots, and they're casting lots to find out on what day they're going to attack God's people. And when you see in later chapters, the day that they figure out that they're going to make the attack on the 13th day of the 12th month. So this is what they're doing. On day 1, first day of the first month, they do pur. They cast lots to know the day and the month. When did they pass the decree? On the 13th day. So if you start casting lots for the first month, you go to the first month, the second month, the third, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And when they cast pur or lots, the lot could have arrived on any day. It could have happened here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They said, oh, it's going to be in the 5th month. That's when we're going to make the law to kill the Jews. But it didn't happen on that day. It didn't happen on that. Right until you get to here, on the 12th day, they finally cast lots and they worked out that it was going to be on the 13th day of the 12th month, because they were doing month by month. And the very next day, after they determined the day, they passed a decree on the 13th. And what number is this? 12. Symbolised by that 120 here. So I've shown you 2 testimonies, at least 2 I think, maybe a bit more, about, no, only 2, about where you get this number 120 and 70, and 12 and 70 from the book of Ezra and book of Esther. And if you start running through the symbology of all of this, you can begin to draw light to confirm the things that we're supposed to do and the things that we're not supposed to do. By understanding what events occur at the beginning of 120, what events occur at the end of 120, and what the significance of the number 70 is. But I've shown you a couple of things, that there's a decree that's made here, which initiates an attack. There's a decree here which initiates attack. There was an attack here. I'm suggesting there was a decree made there. Psalms 48 says that the kings will gather together. We know the kings will gather together here because Protestant America, its fall was complete when the state fell at 9/11, in agreement with Revelation 18 verses 2 and 3. Its first fall hadn't been destroyed here because Babylon was fallen at 9/11. In summary, we're all in the time period of the midnight cry. The dynamics that we've been in for the last 14 years, let me put it here, that's the midnight cry, and that's July 20th. The time period here, we're beginning to come to the end of this time period, and the way we're going to start responding, both to the church and to the world, are going to change in response to that. There are still many truths that I haven't been able to share with you, many I still don't understand. We haven't addressed the issue of what's going on in the USA at this moment and how that affects us as God's people, how that affects the world, if there is the prophetic significance of the issues that are going on in the United States with respect to marriage and the interaction between men and women. But they will have an impact on our understanding of prophetic history as well, as far as I can understand. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll open to questions and answers, I guess.